the Franklin Roosevelt design. And every day at the United Nations throughout its history, the American president's ambassador to the United Nations always stood on the side of freedom. The United States of America in the United Nations voted with the free nations of the world against the cruelest dictatorships in the world, which almost always meant voting against the Soviet Union. In the 21st century, as Russian President Vladimir Putin began turning the Russian government into a dictatorship again, the United States leadership of the free world at the United Nations meant standing against Russian aggression. Since Russia invaded Ukraine exactly 3 years ago on this day, the United Nations passed 6 resolutions against the Russian attack on Ukraine. And the United States voted with the free world against the Russian war on Ukraine every single time until today. The United Nations once again today approved a resolution condemning Russia's war against Ukraine, and for the first time in history, the United States did not stand on the side of freedom in the United Nations. The United States, for the first time in history, voted with the dictator against the free world. Donald Trump voted with Vladimir Putin in the United Nations, and so it's official. It really is. As of today, if there's a leader of the free world, it is not the President of the United States. It might be the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, who played an important role in presidential history today, making Donald Trump the first president in history who had to be interrupted and corrected by an ally when the President of the United States was lying, and lying about that ally. General Charles de Gaulle, who became President of France after World War II, may have been the most egotistical elected president anywhere in the world. Winston Churchill and Franklin Roosevelt couldn't stand de Gaulle during World War II. But they knew they had to deal with him. And they never had public disagreements with General Charles de Gaulle. Emmanuel Macron may be one of the least egotistical French presidents in history, but today, it was the mild-mannered French president who had to interrupt the blustering president of the United States when the president of the United States was lying. And it fell to the French president to correct the American president in a way we have never seen an American president corrected before by another head of state or by anyone. Donald Trump did his standard lie about Europe's aid to Ukraine, the lie that Europe has loaned money to Ukraine, and it's a loan, and Ukraine has to pay it back. Donald Trump became the first American president in history fully humiliated on the world stage by instantly getting caught and corrected in his lie.
Europe is loaning the money to Ukraine. They get their money back. No, in fact, to be frank, we paid 60% of the total defaults, and it was through, like the US, loans, guarantee, grants, and we provided real money. Be clear. We have 230 billion frozen assets in Europe, Russian assets, but this is not as a collateral of the loan because this is not our belonging. So they are frozen. If at the end of the day, the negotiation we will have with Russia, they're ready to give it to us, super. It will be loan at the end of the day, and Russia will have paid for that.
If you believe that, it's okay with me. But they get their money back, and we don't, and now we do. But, that's only fair.
He actually reached out, President of France reached out, grabbed the arm of the American president to stop him from telling a lie about France and the rest of the countries of Europe. So Donald Trump's response to being corrected on his lie was to simply tell the lie again. They get their money back. When President Macron finished speaking, Donald Trump just told the lie again. So on the day when Donald Trump officially sinks the presidency on the international stage lower than it has ever been by not only surrendering leadership of the free world at the United Nations, but standing against the free world, then, right there, in the Oval Office, Donald Trump is humiliated and exposed in a way that no previous president ever could be, because no previous president would be pathological enough to try to tell a lie like that right in front of the person he's lying about. And no previous president could possibly be stupid enough to try to tell a lie like that. But, as our first guest tonight has written, quote, the divide in politics today is between unreality and reality. Yale professor Timothy Snyder wrote that Donald Trump constantly represents unreality. His followers constantly prove they share that same unreality with Donald Trump. They are unreachable by reality. They are unreachable by the reality presented today by the French president. Trump's followers will never see what the French president did to Donald Trump in the Oval Office today. And if they did see it, they wouldn't understand it. Donald Trump knows that, which is why, after the French president catches him in a lie, Donald Trump just tells the lie again. President Macron tried to break through to Trump's followers by appearing on Fox at the end of the day.
Today is clearly the anniversary of the beginning of the aggression war of Russia and Ukraine. They invaded Ukraine 3 years ago. We want peace. And I think the initiative of President
Donald Trump is now threatening that blue states will be wiped off the map during his presidency in what are arguably the most belligerent comments thus far. Let's break down what Trump actually said and why it's not just unlikely that this could happen, but it is practically impossible.
With the help of everyone here tonight, the golden age of America has officially begun, and the golden age of just this whole thing, the red states, it's going to be leading the way to making our country richer and safer and stronger than ever before. The red states are going to do good, and the blue states, I don't know, maybe they'll totally disappear off that map.
Totally disappear off that map. Now let's kind of address the obvious first. If you're living in a blue state, first of all, congratulations. Blue states aren't going anywhere. Okay, California, New York, Illinois, Massachusetts, these states are not just political entities. These are economic powerhouses, as we've talked about before. And the kicker is that the red states depend on blue states. The red states would go bankrupt if it weren't for the subsidies that come from the blue states. The blue states contribute way more in federal taxes than they get in spending. And you look at many of these red states, which the people I'm sure are great, right? This is not attacking people. Mississippi, Alabama, Kentucky, they receive much more in federal dollars than they pay. In other words, the blue states bankroll the red states. So if blue states disappear, as Trump suggests, the red states are going to disappear right along with them. Just look at California, one of the favorite targets of the MAGA right. California alone contributes over $400 billion in federal taxes annually. That's not money that just goes to California. It gets redistributed across the country. Imagine if California disappeared. Where would the money come from? The answer is it would. The red states would have budget shortfalls. Their economies would crater. And only someone who is completely economically illiterate could suggest such a thing. The blue states are responsible for a disproportionate share of the country's GDP. The blue
Here to tell us what it's like to work for the richest man in the world is Inheritance AI founder and lead AI innovator and former SpaceX and Starlink information compliance and assurance lead, Vincent Peters. Vincent, great of you to be here. It's just, Mark Andreessen describes, and I've talked about the Musk method, describes Musk as being more like one of the early industrialists, where he knows everything about the company from top to bottom and gets down in the trenches and asks the very question that he asked all the federal employees, what have you done in the last week? And that's how he ends up being a problem solver. But what was it like working at SpaceX?
Well, working at SpaceX was one of the most, I would say, eye-opening experiences I've had in my professional career. I've worked in banking. I've worked for the United States government as a contractor, and going to SpaceX, you have someone like Elon Musk, who is this generation's, an industrialist for this generation, and he creates an environment where those folks who work for him, he has ultimate trust in them, and he trusts them until he loses trust in their ability to be able to do their jobs. He's definitely not a micromanager, but does believe in the first principles concept of being able to understand what folks need to do, understanding the problem at a fundamental standpoint, and then addressing it from there.
There's a lot of folks in D.C. who I think are hoping that Musk will back down from the approach he's taking now. Is he the kind of guy who, with pressure that he's getting in D.C., is likely to back down, or how do you expect him to respond?
I think if you look at Elon's track record in both Tesla when they were, having financial issues, and SpaceX, not I got to SpaceX in 2018, and they went through a bit of a restructuring and laid some people off as soon as I got there. I've not seen them back down, at Tesla or SpaceX, and I don't expect it to back down on this stage, especially when the future of the nation is on the line.
Vincent, what can he accomplish with the working underneath President Trump? But really, the goal is to right-size the federal government and cut waste like no one ever has before. Because for years, it's kind of insane to think that we've been expecting the people who created this vast $36 trillion in debt problem to be the people who would somehow fix it.
Absolutely, we have the right president at the White House who understands that the country needs to be run from a business perspective. And if you're going to run it from a business perspective, you have some of the best people in the history of business there helping to solve the country's problems. One of the things that we've done at Inheritance that I learned at SpaceX was that with working with the government, even as government contractors, which SpaceX is a government contractor as well. We are fiduciaries of the American taxpayers' dollars, and we want to make sure, you can look at the track record of SpaceX and how they've worked with NASA and the savings and efficiencies that they provided to NASA with being able to send astronauts to the space station, send satellites to geosynchronous orbit, to low Earth orbit. We use those same vehicles. No other companies are working in that way. So that type of innovation that was applied to space, that type of innovation that was applied to electric vehicles, is the same type of innovation that is going to take to help America right the ship and right the path that we're on right now.
Vincent Peters, you know what it's like to work for Elon Musk. He knows his stuff. He never backs down. We appreciate your perspective on it today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right.
It is time for Money Called Politics. And the line between Donald Trump, the president, and Donald Trump, the businessman, it pretty much doesn't exist anymore. Last week, he flew to Miami to give a keynote speech at a conference hosted by the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund. And the next day, he hosted the head of that fund, guess where? The White House, to discuss a deal to reunify the golf world. Remember, this fund not only invested $2 billion into a business run by Jared Kushner, President Trump's son-in-law, it also is the main backer of Live Golf, which has already held 5 major tournaments at Trump courses since it launched just 3 years ago. My friend Ron Insana joins us now. He's a CNBC senior analyst and the CEO of YFy5.ai. And Charlotte Howard joins us, executive editor and New York bureau chief for The Economist. Ron, what do you make of this? I mean, I guess we shouldn't be surprised, but here it is.
Well, it violates, at least we think, the emoluments clause of the Constitution.
Okay, ready? Here's what the president did with the emoluments clause last time.
And Congress
He's
is
going to
supposed
do it again, and he'll be able to.
and at a scale the likes of which, to put it in President Trump's terms, we have not seen before. I mean, if you remember Spiro Agnew in 1973, then Vice President
We don't.
to Richard Nixon, resigned over a bribery scandal that, by comparison, was extremely small. Richard Nixon's relationships with people like Robert Fesco and Bebe Rebozo were looked over time and time again, and some people went to jail. This is just happening in front of our eyes. There's no pushback from Congress. No one is really screaming about the fact that he may, in fact, be making money off his relationships with the Saudis for his own personal benefit, which is prohibited by the Constitution unless Congress approves it.
Wall Street is potentially starting to get antsy, though. Last week at that same conference in Miami, you didn't just have, it wasn't just hosted by the Saudis. You had every major investor there, almost every major CEO there. And the New York Times was reporting that the mood in the room was antsy. I talked to a CEO in the room who said Howard Lutnick got on that stage and announced he hired Elon Musk. He came up with Doge. People are starting to get anxious. Just last week, we were Jamie Dimon sold almost $300 million of JP Morgan stock.
You had this really weird week last week where there was a high, right, in the S&P 500, and then by the end of the week, you've seen this dip again. And so I think some of the anxiety that you described is showing up now in the markets, and particularly in consumer sentiment data. You have consumers who are expecting really high inflation. The expectations are near a 30-year high for what they think will be the outcome of Trump's tariffs. And you have investors wondering across this array of things that Trump has done in his first month. The promise of Trump for people in the business community was that he would push deregulation and push tax cuts. And what you're getting instead, at least for now, is chaos and the potential for trade wars. And so how all of this uncertainty begins to factor into the stock market performance, I think is something that you're going to see in the coming weeks and months, where you see people becoming just more anxious.
What about the massive layoffs we're seeing in the federal government? On one hand, listen, there's lots of people who say the government needs to be more efficient. Maybe there's jobs that don't need to exist. But Apollo Asset Management has a piece out last week saying the data right now still looks good. But the trickle down we could see from tens of thousands of layoffs of federal workers, it could have a big negative economic impact on that.
Sure, where do you see weekly jobless claims jump? When people, if they don't get bought out, they start collecting jobless claims. And it was not just Torsten Slot, whom we referenced at Apollo, but also Steve Cohen, who I know and worked for at one juncture in my career, came out, and he rarely speaks publicly about the economy and markets, and said both tariffs and fiscal austerity, as preached by Doge, will be negative for the economy and the stock market. And Warren Buffett is sitting on a record $334 billion in cash at Berkshire Hathaway with no explanation. Now, those of us who know the greatest investor in the world and probably the greatest trader in the world, when they're both doing things like that, maybe start to worry a little bit about the economy and markets.
I mentioned Jamie Dimon. He was on television saying it was too soon to tell the impact Doge will have. Watch this.
Everybody, they're going to be inefficient, very confident, and it needs a lot of work. I'm hoping it's quite successful. If it's overreach, the things they're doing looks not legal, of course it's not. I'm hoping it's not the case, but again, it's very early stages to tell exactly what it's going to mean and how it's going to affect the economy.
What do you think?
I think you see a few things going on right there. I think that on one hand, it is too soon in some ways to tell what the outcome will be. And many CEOs and people who are leading these big banks have been calling for years to have regulations pared back, right? And so it's a mission that they agree with. It's the means that can be problematic. So I think you see that reflected in Diamond's comments. And I also think you see a reality now, which is that most CEOs got burned from speaking out against Trump publicly, and they're treading very carefully.
What do you think about that? Because when we talk about deregulation, especially in places like banks, the financial industry has 7 different regulators examining that. Is there an argument to be made that not that there's less regulation, but it can be streamlined? maybe there doesn't have to be 7 different independent agencies. Unfortunately, we're not hearing that full explanation from DOJ. It's just, we don't need this, let's rip it out.
Well, but the great thing about that is we've had settlement regulators for a long time, and we still had the great financial crisis in 2008, where almost everyone was asleep at the switch. The Federal Reserve, the Comptroller of the Currency, the FDIC, and there was no CFPB at the time, but, we
And post CFPB, we had, what was it, 3 banks go under 2 years ago.
the United States went under for lack of supervision. So I think, obviously, we need more efficiency and more competence in the oversight of the financial system. Whether we need more people or fewer people is an open question.
Let's talk about. Well, just on that, I will say that there are some measures that DOJ is taking that will make it harder for agencies to do their job in an efficient way. So take the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, right? If you revoke access to Westlaw, this is getting a little geeky, but
that's okay. So let's do it.
You have to be able to look up case law. You have to be able to understand the history of cases that pertain to a given issue. If you can't actually access a database, you're going and looking up these things in old books somewhere. I mean, it literally makes the agencies less efficient. So there's some measures that seem like they're cost-cutting in the short term, but actually they just hamper an agency from doing very basic workings of government.
Well, it's funny that you say that because I actually saw a video of a federal worker who was laid off from his job who was a Trump supporter. He said, I was excited to have a businessman as president. I was excited with the idea of Elon Musk, but I thought he would take a scalpel to the government when he looked at where he can make improvements. Instead, it's been a sledgehammer. Is that something that we don't realize about Elon Musk's style? Because he's never been a scalpel guy. He's always been a move fast, break things, sledgehammer guy. And that's been a great success for him in the business world. But he hasn't had to be responsible for 330 million people, which is the role of the federal government.
Yeah, the tech bro culture doesn't really work when you're disassembling government at this rapid and a pace, and as you say, with a sledgehammer. I mean, there are people who do extremely important jobs at the Federal Aviation Administration, at TSA, at places where we're seeing job reduction. And by the way, large corporations are required to give 60 days notice and access to health insurance when they're laying people off. We've not seen any such advance notice of these fire rates potentially. Indeed, if tomorrow is the day by which some people will have to resign.
So when they fire people and try to rehire them, they can't even find their phone numbers.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is not, even businesses don't really run this way, despite what the point they're trying to make, that it needs to be run more like a business. It is a government. It is not a business. You don't run them in the same way.
Ron, bad news for you. Charlotte's first visit for Money Power Politics.
You didn't give her the win again?
She won the second.
Last time.
You know what? I'm so sorry. Welcome aboard.
Was it the Westlaw reference?
Exactly. Welcome. And you know what? Let me tell you. If he would have hit me with a Westlaw, he knows I would have kicked him out. I would have been like, nobody knows what that is. Leave Ron. Charlotte, she gets it.
So people are resisting Elon Musk all around the world. And check this out. This is the Tesla, the swastika car. Goes from 0 to 1939 in 3 seconds. That's summing up today's video is the resistance to Elon Musk, and this story keeps getting wilder and wilder. And I had to share this stuff with you guys because I know we need all pick me up to know that you're not alone and you're not crazy. The world is insane, and sane people are trying to fight back. Actually, BuzzFeed collected a lot of responses, trolling responses to Elon Musk's email request of 5 things he did last week. And I want to share some of these as well. It says, I was thinking of responding in this manner. Didn't vote for Elon on Monday, didn't vote for Elon on Tuesday, didn't vote for Elon on Wednesday, didn't vote for Elon on Thursday, and didn't vote for Elon on Friday. He also got this, responses to Elon's 5 things he did last week. Didn't do checking, didn't ignore my children's mother, didn't golf, didn't wield a chainsaw. He also got this, Dear Elon, here's what I did last week. Got blitzed on ketamine, ignored my children, tweeted 1,782 times, wore weird sunglasses inside, got humiliated by astronauts. Also, you got this. What did last week? And that's the response. So I guess people are trolling the Elon. 1, vintage your mom in the back of a 99 Civic. 2, but not before we went to the Waffle House. 3, but not before we did white powder off the wallet or the candy station. 4, but not before we downloaded our data and dropped it off to
consulate at 5 per week. But not before we donated our 401ks to Pfizer. We also got this. This is actually from our community. You guys are funny as well. From Mark. Mark says, I think my response would be something like this. Dear Mr. Muskrat, in response to your email, here you go. 1. Wrote up a list of why I hate Trump. 2. Made a list of why I hate Muskrat. 3. Made a list of why our country is in the toilet. 4. Made up flyers listing all the illegal stuff Trump and Muskrat are doing to give my coworkers. And 5. Made a list of things to think about when that will keep me from laughing every time I hear Trump or Muskrat speak. Have a nice day. This was someone else from our community from Woodless. Clearly resisting, as I'm showing you guys. Canada, they're looking at removing citizenship. 200,000 people have already signed the petition. Canada, don't let us down. Get everyone on board to sign this thing. The basic gist of it is like, yo, you got this Elon Musk guy working with a foreign government, right? And he wants to destroy our sovereignty. So actually, I think that's pretty good grounds for calling the dude a traitor. Why not? So I think this actually could have a shot in Canada. That was really crazy to go through that. So let me know what you guys think, especially Canadians. Please sign this if you haven't already. On top of that, the Musk people are getting yet and more data. This is what National Institute of Health. A judge has blocked them, though, in a couple of agencies. The basic gist of it is, I think, and this is where they might really get them very quickly, is get them on privacy data, right? Data privacy, I should say. Because when, for those of you who work in the government, you guys know this, you usually do a whole bunch of training and kind of things, the kind of things you look at, how to keep it safe, how to keep it from leaking, wrong hands, etc. And we don't know what kind of training these people have had, what kind of clinics they've had. It's all done haphazardly. We found out, like, who people are, through the press, because they tried to keep them in secret, and that was the Doge hacker people that he would instruct them to just say their first name at meetings, and many government leaders will call it BS on this stuff. So the judge is blocking them from getting data, and like I said, I think the data privacy laws may be what ends up nailing them early on. There's a lot of stuff they're breaking, I'm saying this one so again, that's the judge is blocking them on that. On top of that, you have this, and I think this may be another way that sees this pop up. And I've told you guys before, much of his wealth is tied to Tesla stock, right? Or you can say, it doesn't work, it's not the stock per se. Well, it is. It's hardly traded company, so yes, we have one, but it's not publicly traded. So Tesla stock publicly traded, everyone could just dump it, zero, right? The other thing that people could do is they could just quit. Like, what if he doesn't have any employees over at Tesla or SpaceX? And I think that's something that could actually happen. For example, today, SpaceX engineer is leaving Musk's team. This person here, she wrote a goodbye. It was Sarah, something yellow, and I guess she worked out with like facility or something like that. And there's multiple people who already left Musk. I don't think they really have much left in Tesla. SpaceX, I haven't seen as many departures, but I think it is certainly a possibility. As Elon Musk gets more and more, how can we say what's right to say it? We'll say embedded with the Trump people, embedded with whatever foreign money that he's taking, and just committing crimes. I don't know another way to put it. And there are people going to be like, you know what? I just got to get out. I don't want to be tied to the ship. And I'm just telling you guys, be on the right side of history in this one. It's clear as day that what the Musk Trumps are doing are frankly really awful, illegal, etc. And you don't want to be a part of it. So my advice to anyone involved in Tesla or SpaceX is get out. That's it. Get out. Don't be involved if you don't want to be on the right side of history. On top of that, I'm going to point this stuff up. You have to understand who these people are. This is like, it's this crazy political drama mixed with like a soap opera on TV. And we see like who these characters are in these movie slash TV show. It's like the worst reality TV show ever because we all can be in it, right? It's fun to watch it on TV, but like we're all in this thing. And we can ask like, how do we get on this timeline? This was the drama today. MAGA influencers at war after ASI saying players, quote, rocket babies must text social media. Rocket babies that we're talking about now? Okay, so the basic gist of this one, this is a wild one. So Musk has a whole bunch of kids, okay? And one of the baby mamas, he's not married to this person, she's claiming, hey, you got your kid, she's suing Musk to like say this is definitely her kid, etc., and then wants custody. Um, and I guess the way they're framing this now, and this is coming from another person on social media, people, this is Isabella. She's a kind of good list on the phone. I don't know the Sassy Sinclair person, I don't know this movie person, but I do know that they're suing Musk, etc. Now, she's basically claiming that her friend is a gold digger and was seeking advice on how to give Elon the attention to have space. That's the kind of people these are. Let's read this together. It's how nuts this stuff is. Okay, so Isabella says, I agree with Lara percent. I wasn't going to post these, but now that St. Clair actually has leaked her private signal messages to Elon Musk after lying and saying she wanted privacy, there's more evidence actually plans to baby trap Elon. We're talking about baby traps. And I want to bring this up too. This also brings up a key point to where someone like a Trump or a Musk are inherently a security threat because they are so easily trapped in these kind of scandals, etc. So this would.
I'd like to ask us how was the Grammys?
How was it to beat the Grammys? That bit was cold. What made, what, yeah, it was fire. How was the tour, Kanye? How's the tour, Kanye? I mean, yeah, sorry. It's coming up. My bad, bro.
So, Joe, that side-by-side meeting between Macron and President Trump in the Oval Office yesterday, just fascinating to watch their body language and then, of course, to listen to the substance of what they were saying.
The body language, the substance of what they're saying, the annual handshaking contest. It's always fascinating when these two get together. You never know exactly what is going to happen. Of course, talking about Ukraine, that was the context of the meeting. And of course, for much of what went on yesterday, Willie, and we're going to start talking about that meeting in Ukraine. But first, I want to just briefly read from the Wall Street Journal editorial page today, who aptly calls yesterday what it was, a sad day for the United States at the UN. And in one part of it, the Wall Street Journal editorial page writes this: perhaps Donald Trump thinks that telling the truth about Russia will cause Mr. Putin to walk away from Ukraine negotiations. Ronald Reagan, who also sought peace and achieved it, never shrank from telling the truth about the Soviet Union. The truth was an essential weapon in defeating what Reagan called an evil empire. And they end by saying it's hard to be optimistic if you won't tell the truth about which country started the war. So really just a stunning moment yesterday where the United States of America sided with an invader in blocking a UN resolution on the third anniversary of an invasion that the entire world saw. They know who the dictator is, just like the New York Post said to Donald Trump last week. The world knows who the dictator is. The world knows who invaded whom. And the world knows who is on the side of freedom and who's on the side of tyranny. And right now, the United States, officially at the United Nations, does not.
Yeah, in a stark contrast yesterday, as there were remembrances around the world from Western democratic nations, free nations, siding, of course, with Ukraine, victims of the invasion 3 years ago. The United States and the UN, as you point out, breaking ranks with those European allies, joining Russia and North Korea, among others, in opposing a resolution that calls for Russia to withdraw from all occupied territory in Ukraine. The U.S. instead proposed a separate resolution avoiding territorial language, mirroring recent Trump administration suggestions that Ukraine may have to cede land to get peace. Ultimately, the United States abstained on its own measure after European amendments strengthened its wording. Despite U.S. opposition, Ukraine's resolution did pass with 93 votes. President Trump was asked yesterday about American opposition to that UN resolution.
Can you explain the rationale for having the U.S. vote against a resolution that Ukraine vote down?
I would rather not explain it now, but it's sort of self-evident, I think.
So, John, if you look at the front page of the Journal, Joe was reading from the op-ed page. So the news side, U.S. sides with Russia, China against Ukraine in UN vote. We could add Belarus and North Korea to the company the U.S. is keeping at the UN yesterday.
Yeah, international pariahs for the most part. Again, it's worth taking a moment reflecting on how things have changed over 3 years. When this war began, we heard from President Biden locking arms with Ukraine and our European allies to say they will support Kyiv till the very end. President Biden said that the U.S. backing of Ukraine's efforts to repel Russia would be unwavering, and of course sent billions of dollars over time for weapons and munitions. And now, over the last few days, we have President Trump prioritizing his phone call relationship with President Putin. We have the meeting, our first talks between U.S. and Russian officials in Saudi Arabia, Ukraine not invited. We have Trump calling Zelensky a dictator and being pressed as to whether Putin is the same, will not answer, and doing so repeatedly. And now we have here at the UN, the United States refusing to acknowledge in plain language what happened, which was this is a war of Russian aggression. That Russia is the one who invaded, and of course, subtext here, this war could end at any time if Vladimir Putin would simply call off his troops. And we should note, even as there are now talks, the peace process may be on its way to beginning, Russia is not only continuing, but escalating their bombardment of Ukrainian cities with drone strikes and the like. So, we saw French President Macron there yesterday flat out contradict Trump in a couple of moments, saying that no, Europe gave this money to Ukraine. We're not expecting it to be paid back. Suggesting this was a cause that Europe would still continue to support, as much as there is acknowledgement, Willie, that yes, that we are nearing likely the end stages. There will be some sort of negotiations. Trump suggesting that a minerals deal may still be part of this, and then Zelensky may be coming to the White House next week or so.
That was a telling moment in the Oval Office when a reporter said, "You have called Zelensky a dictator. Is Putin a dictator?" Donald Trump would not answer and changed the subject. Meanwhile, President Trump's White House meeting yesterday with President Macron came on the third anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And while the two leaders were friendly, their views about the war and each other's support for Ukraine were vastly different. The French president said a peace deal must not mean a surrender for Ukraine. It must not mean a ceasefire without guarantees, and it must allow for Ukrainian sovereignty. Meanwhile, President Trump refused to call Russian President Vladimir Putin a dictator and was focused mainly on recouping billions of dollars in U.S. aid to Ukraine. Macron briefly corrected Trump when the president said Europe was already getting repaid.
Zelensky a dictator, but you use the same words without including.
I don't use those words lightly. I think that we're going to see how it all works out. Let's see what happens. I think we have a chance of a really good settlement between various countries. And you're talking about Europe, and you're talking about Ukraine as part of that whole situation. The other side has a lot of support also. So let's see how it all works out. Might work out. Look, you can never make up lives. You can make up the money, but you can't make up the lives. A lot of lives, plus I think probably a lot more lives than people are talking about. It's been a rough war, but I think we're close to getting it solved. Europe is loaning the money to Ukraine. They get their money back.
No, in fact, to be frank, we paid 60% of the total default, and it was so like the US, loans, guarantee, grants, and we provided real money. To be clear, we have 230 billion frozen assets in Europe, Russian assets, but this is not as a collateral of a loan because this is not our belonging. So they are frozen. If at the end of the day, in the negotiation we will have with Russia, they're ready to give it to us. Super. If you don't at the end of the day, that people that.
If you believe that, it's okay with me. If they get that money back, we don't, and now we do. But, that's only fair.
It's not true. It's really not. What Macron said is true. Frank, so much about this is just double speak. We live in really an upside down world right now, especially, domestically and when it comes to foreign policy. But you actually have a piece in the Atlantic, and it's a man who actually stands up to Trump. And you say Zelensky's willingness to stand up to President Donald Trump, holding true to American values in the face of American intimidation, was a perverse trading of places. And I think back, all the way back to Harry Truman in 1947, the Truman Doctrine, the creation of NATO, the Berlin airlift, the United States standing up time and time again to those that the Soviet Union, that the Russians would want to oppress. What happened in 1980 when the Soviets were about to go into Poland, and the so-called Porcupine Doctrine that the Carter administration and Dr. Brzezinski put together, saying, sure, go into Poland if you want. We'll make sure it's like swallowing a porcupine. You don't want to do it. What we did throughout the 1980s, our support for solidarity, all the way up to the Berlin Wall going down, the United States, first in defeating Nazism and then defeating Soviet tyranny, we've always known what side we were on when it came to fighting against Soviet and Russian aggression. Yesterday, just absolutely stunning and a stinging rebuke that most everything American foreign policy has stood for the better, for 80 years.
Right, it's an upside down world, and part of the reason it's upside down are the values that are infusing Trump's foreign policy here. That Ukraine, which was the victim of Russian aggression, we're not even able to acknowledge that fact. And here, the president is trying to basically extort Ukraine in its incredibly vulnerable state. Zelensky initially proposed this idea that there could be some sharing of his nation's resources as a gesture of gratitude. It was his form of trying to suck up to Trump initially. But then when Scott Bessent arrived in Kyiv to negotiate the terms of this, it wasn't a negotiation. He pushed, in mob-like fashion, he pushed a piece of paper across the desk to Zelensky and said, these are the terms. And these were terms that were just punitive, that they were trying to, Zelensky, who's been a kind of perpetual thorn in Trump's side, going back to that very beautiful phone call that they had that was provoked the first impeachment, he's always had this animus towards Zelensky. And here, that animus was being imposed on the entirety of Ukraine.
Yeah, but Frank, the thing about that deal is, it would be one thing if you pushed these outrageous demands across the table at Zelensky, who's siding with the country that's repelling Russian aggression, but there was no security guarantee even attached to that. It was, give us all your money and we will give you nothing in return. It wasn't even, you said it wasn't even that, because there was no protection afforded. It was, give us all your money and we give you nothing in return.
Right. Exactly. There was it was extortion. There was nothing on the other side for Ukraine. And when Zelensky first proposed that deal, he was saying, look, we know that you're going to take risk in protecting us and guaranteeing our security. So here are some access to some of our valuable minerals in exchange. Instead, Trump was behaving like a Russian oligarch. And in the end, shouldn't Russia be the one that has to pay some sort of price for having invaded Ukraine? It's perverse to impose those costs on Ukraine, the victim.
Yeah, I mean, NATO membership is a big step, and President Zelensky said he would step aside if his nation.
Extraction is ready when you are, Alpha.
senior U.S. military officers and senior civilians in the Defense Department, really senior, like people who serve on the Joint Chiefs, people who are secretaries of the various branches of the military, I have been able to meet and interview and get to know more of them than you think. I wrote a book about the military a decade or so ago, and that started a process in which I met a lot of these folks, and it's been an honor. And while folks at that very senior level come from all sorts of different backgrounds, they come to those leadership positions through all sorts of different routes. By the time any of them have served at the most senior ranks of the military and the Defense Department, I think one of the things you can say about all of them in unison is that they are measured. They are, the word unflappable is almost right, but it feels like it needs a more worrying root word than flat. Right? That these are people who are like epically even keeled. And that is why I asked to be on the show tonight, a man who until last month served as Secretary of the United States Air Force. His name is Frank Kendall. He is a West Point graduate, an Army veteran, a former Undersecretary of Defense, and for the last 4 years he was Secretary of the United States Air Force. He is not a flappable man. And yet, Friday night, President Donald Trump and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth announced the sudden and unexplained removal of the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest-ranking officer in the United States Navy, the Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force, and the senior lawyers, the senior legal officers in the Air Force and the Army and the Navy. Now, Frank Kendall responded to that in writing. And what he wrote, to me, is the unflappable veteran defense official version of an air raid siren. Just listen to this. Quote, President Trump's decision to fire senior military leaders without cause is foolish and a disgrace. It politicizes our professional military in a dangerous and debilitating way. What frightens me most is the removal of 3 judge advocates general, the most senior uniformed legal authorities in the Defense Department. Their removal is one more element of this administration's attack on the rule of law, and an especially disturbing part. The military's top judge advocates general are the senior military professionals who interpret and enforce the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the rules that guide troops in the field. They have the independent legal authority to tell any military commander or political appointee that an order from the President or the Secretary of Defense is unlawful, cannot be given, and should not be obeyed. Mr. Trump and Mr. Hegseth will now get to choose the JAG leadership for all 3 military departments. One has to ask why JAG leadership was singled out for replacement. This is part of a much larger pattern of disrespect, even disdain for the rule of law. If there is one characteristic of this president and this administration, it is the utter lack of respect for legal constraints. Kendall says, quote, we are in danger when the legal constraints on how the president uses the military, including within the United States, are ignored or brushed aside. Our country is in uncharted territory. We have an administration that is waging war against the rule of law. The evidence is everywhere. We don't yet know how far it will go as he seeks to control, reinterpret, rewrite, ignore, or defy legal constraints, including the Constitution itself. He concludes with this. The replacement of the military JAG leadership is one skirmish in that war, but it is time for the American people across the political spectrum to recognize what is happening. Quote, America has a rogue president and a rogue administration, and we need to acknowledge that and respond. Joining us now is Frank Kendall, who until last month was Secretary of the United States Air Force. Secretary Kendall, it is a real honor to have some time with you tonight. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Rachel. Great to be with you.
Am I right to read this as you essentially sending an alert that although, to civilians, this might not have registered at first glance like the biggest deal, given everything else, you're essentially telling the public this is a very big deal and one that needs a response?
It is a big deal, and I chose my words carefully and very thoughtfully. I felt that in the announcements about the people being replaced, that the removal of the judge advocate generals, the head lawyers from each of the services, was not getting the attention that it deserved. And I really wanted to call some attention to that because of the implications that could possibly.
On this, the 3rd anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we watched in New York this morning as the United States at the United Nations stood firmly on the same side as the Kremlin against a resolution calling out Moscow's aggression and demanding an immediate withdrawal of Russian troops. At the same time, in Washington and the East Room at the White House, we watched as a delicate new reality of American relations with European allies was on full display as President Trump welcomes French President Emmanuel Macron. And the attempts to be friendly were juxtaposed by an extraordinary moment in the Oval Office, where the French president fact-checked the U.S. president in real time.
Stop!
Richardson's newsletter regarding Timothy Snyder, spelling and Marjorie, as you said, some of his shit. They are still breaking things and stealing things. They keep trying to break and steal. And the propaganda magic around the whole article coup is fake. Nervous was nervous Trump. And the point is, not necessarily everything's going to be over in 30 days, or that things are going to collapse in 30 days. But Democrats are going to force now, since Election Day, and that's the news as well. And Albert is right, what the news is saying. For the first time since Election Day, Democrats are starting to see an opening. And with that opening, a lot of questions being about who will lead this party.
Brian joining us now, co-founder, CEO of YFy65kGh5, and journalist, editor, and author of the newsletter Fresh Out, available on Substack, Tina Brown. The BBC's Kathy Kay is still with us as well. She's the host of the Rest is Politics podcast, which is amazing as well.
So, check that out. Actually, really about this, which is sort of different camps we have right now for leaders who want to take charge of the Democratic Party and lead the fight against Republicans who got Trump. Talk about that. Yeah, I mean, Carlos, it's like it's kind of looking where the Democratic Party is right now, right? We also have polls showing Democrats have never been as party more popular than they are at this moment. On top of that, they don't have much power, right? If you don't control the Senate, you don't control the House, you don't control the White House, you don't control the courts. There's only so many levers that you can actually pull. So the debate inside the party is, do you accept that some of the things that Donald Trump wants to do directionally might be correct? But the governor leader or Governor Paulus in Colorado in that camp saying, listen, maybe you're with them on terrorists or part of terrorists, maybe you're with them on the border and conceding that things need to be done and that everything doesn't need to be as white. That's one camp. If the other is your Chris Murphy, is a senator from Connecticut, or J.D. Pritzker in Illinois, who are from very liberal states that have the freedom to be in sort of a welfare mindset day in, day out, operating out of the house. I think that is the big fight. I think you know, we know where politics works is if Trump's going to live or die based on his performance. So tell me what inflation looks like in a month. Tell me what
Happy Monday, everyone. We begin tonight with what I think is the question. When you are in the midst of this crisis, and specifically a crisis of democracy, how do you resist? What fascism isn't just coming, it's already here. So what, if anything, can you do about it? One thing you can try to learn from history from the people in this situation in countries around the world and in America that don't know. As my friend Rachel Maddow always says, history is here to help. America hasn't always been a free country for everyone, and we've had resistance movements from day one. From enslaved people fighting their captivity, shout out to Harriet Tubman, with a 92%er before 92% is. And even taking a part during the Civil War, to the women's movement and the workers' rights movement and the Stonewall gay rights movement and all the versions of the rights to make this a legitimate for everyone and to have a true future. And that is history's lesson, right? But the most important thing, first, is to fight back. To never stop resisting. Do not obey in advance, as Chris Snyder put it. To not take the lead, to coordinate, always and always.
All the time. Shut up. If you zoom in on this photo, the French president
stand right there. He looks bruising. He or she did that is, by the way, what a strange meeting between the French president and Donald Trump yesterday. And Donald Trump continued to lie about searching for foreign business to try to buy like magical gold that is the French president Emmanuel was like trying to support Ukraine. You need to support NATO. You watch what happened.
We're actually going to Fort Knox to see the gold. Maybe somebody's selling gold.
By the way, there was just like all of these like weird like handshakes going on. Like, I think French President Emmanuel Macron was trying to just shake the crap out of Donald Trump's hand and like back check Donald Trump to his face and just stronger handshakes. I'll tell you about hearing what was going on. It's just like what's even happening here? Like I was supposed to hear that. And then over here, you're the independence.
So wraps up there, the president's talk, and the first president, and then
Now, here things get serious. The French president fact checks Donald Trump, trying to Donald Trump's face for Trump trying to lie and say that Europe was not sufficiently funding Ukraine. Trump saying all the Putin stuff. And then this is where, after shaking the crap out of Trump's hand, causing these bruises, the French president Emmanuel Macron was like, oh, you are wrong. Let me explain to you. Watch out for me. So yesterday marked the 3-year anniversary of Russia's so I think the strategy by Canada, Europe, Australia, and elsewhere was kind of one, get the democratization of the world other than the United States, basically advance get the leaders to go to Ukraine to contain the president, show support, show that they're Ukraine's solidarity. Then instead of the White House to raise aid, kind of like this is like an official probably almost like chorus and it just came from distracted and Trump tries to say crazy stuff, pro-Putin stuff, fact checking the fucking world media as well, and then sending a message. I think it was brilliant also because it came right all the Trump's plans were for the day as well. Because the way yesterday started, you'll remember, was when Donald Trump basically joined the axis of evil with Russia, Belarus, Hungary, and North Korea to oppose the United Nations resolution condemning Russia's unlawful invasion of Ukraine. I mean, what an FU to our allies in Ukraine and ally for Donald Trump to do that, to oppose the United Nations resolution saying Russia was the aggressor. I mean, literally joining yourself with the axis of evil. But then I think Europe was like, get Macron there, distract Trump, make some power moves over there, and then we'll be in Ukraine, and we'll show support, and we'll show what we're going to basically do with European solidarity, join with Canada, Australia, and others. That's what I think was going on. And throughout the day yesterday, Donald Trump with his bruised hand was posting just weird crap like this, like photos of himself with Elon Musk, and articles from like right-wing propaganda rags like the Daily Caller saying Trump's first month of shock and awe has delivered lightning. What it's delivered is low approval ratings for Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans who are just getting obliterated and pummeled in polling. I think Democrats up by like 13-14% in generic polls, and a congressional election was to be how Trump's approval is plummeting. Elon Musk's approval is like literally in Doge toilet bowls at this point. People are pissed at taking away Medicaid. They're making all of these cuts to important government programs that people rely on. Elon Musk and his crew of 19 to 25-year-olds are like taking your data and your medical records and social security information, your tax records, medical files, and what the hell's going on. And by the way, here's a tracker of Trump, 35 days in office. As of yesterday, 9 days golfing, and other days he was like at the Super Bowl, and he was driving around in the NASCAR track at the Daytona 500 and was going okay. So he spent about 25% of his presidency thus far golfing. And by the way, yesterday, because they try to project like how big and tough they are. So Trump has his United States attorney from the DOJ. Like the DOJ is just saying that they're Trump's personal attorney, not the attorneys for the United States of America. Trump's personal attorneys, like this is Edward Martin. He's the MAGA United States attorney. This is the guy who's been threatening all of the like Democratic Congress members and saying that he's going to, he's criminally investigating them for all of the protests and everything. Here's what he goes. As President Trump's lawyer, we are proud to fight to protect his leadership as our president, and we are vigilant in standing against entities like the Associated Press that refuse to put America first because they're calling the Gulf of Mexico, not the Gulf of America. I mean, this is like a psychopathic, deranged authoritarian regime we have here in the United States. I mean, I shouldn't laugh because these people are doing things that are so dastardly and disgusting, but sometimes they're so cartoonishly villainous that you just have to be like, I read this in a Hollywood script, I would be like, it's not believable, like, tone it down a little bit. As we explain on our Smash account, we don't represent Donald Trump, we represent the United States. This statement is fundamentally anti-American, and not only is the statement absurd and wrong, but it's also grammatically incorrect. You don't know how to spell Trump's. But in the press room, where they're banning the Associated Press right now, this is from the official White House account. It says, victory. They're declaring victory. Another horrible day on the market yesterday with the NASDAQ. The NASDAQ went down over 1% yesterday. I don't know about you, but my 401k is now doing better. Under former President Biden and soaring, and already under Donald Trump, it's volatile and not doing well. Prices are surging right now. Inflation is back, and it's worse than almost ever, and it's heading in the worst direction. Trump's tariff threats are screwing with businesses. We're seeing federal workers laid off. There's another plane incident yesterday in Atlanta where people had to be evacuated where a plane, was filled with smoke. Egg prices are at record highs. Housing is less affordable. I could go on and on and on, but you get what 80% of Americans view the economy as being in the gutter right now. But they're declaring victory at the White House. Victory because it's the whole things about home of America. Like literally the dumbest stuff. So by the way, Trump was asked by reporters yesterday, can you explain the rationale of why the U.S. voted against the UN resolution that Ukraine proposed to declare its independence? I remember other stuff happening. Associated Press voter. Trump expresses hope Russia's war in Ukraine is neither in any day as he meets with France's Macron. But take a look here when you actually read the article. It says, on Monday, he said that he had not discussed resolving the conflict in Ukraine in detail with Trump, and nor did Russia and America negotiate deals when they met in Saudi Arabia last week. So who is that with the Saudi Arabian meeting in place? They didn't even really discuss the Ukraine resolutions that much. You get what Putin's saying here? The whole point of that meeting was not to do with Ukraine. Do you get what's happening here? It was to make the United States normalize Russia, to de-isolate Russia from the international community, to help Russia's markets so Russia can buy time, so it can refuel, make more money, to further its war against Ukraine. And what Russia's trying to do is establish this new world order where it has the United States, fix the United States, and Europe. That's what I don't know if they can Marco Rubio and all of these people, the Trump regime influence, other than the people it's not actually not it's some bizarre stuff. Trump is constantly posting him and Elon Donald Trump saying now that we're because his support of people invited to Mar-a-Lago. Here Trump's bragging that it was the best month in the history of the presidency.
And we've made a great deal of progress. People say it was the best month for a president in our country's history. I hope that's right, but I feel it's right. We've done a lot of things in a very short period of time forward.
Then you have over here Matt Johnson. Speaking yesterday saying Elon's great, Elon's cracked everybody loves what he's doing, and it's good in Congress. And they oversight. The Congress for decades has been out. We haven't been able to job well. Molested the dad, and of course, can't say he was hidden. How many of you know the bureaucracy was not forthcoming? That's fair. That's the whole point. That's the problem. That's the deep state we're talking about. So we were hiding from Congress. We didn't know that USA had was funding drag shows in Oregon or whatever, transgender operas in Colombia or whatever, that's madness. But the Elon is crafting from me. It's now inside the agencies. He's created this algorithms that are constantly flowing through the data, as he told us, obviously that is a lie. They're going to get the information, they're going to transform the way the federal government works at the end of this. As the inferiority itself possible, it is truly a revolutionary moment information.
Here's Laura Ingraham from Fox, and she calls federal workers lazy and says that they don't have real jobs and they're just trying to gin up sympathy and they don't really have real jobs. Here, play this clip.
Now, how do you resurrect your party, though? By protecting red tape and the bureaucracy. By trying to gin up sympathy for federal workers who need to get real jobs in the real world like most of America. Ever heard of it? Now, do Democrats really think that Americans will stop liking Trump because he fires these people?
I mean, it's some despicable stuff right there. One other thing I'd like to point out, which is the Office of Special Counsel, which is the agency responsible for investigating illegal actions taken against federal employees, has made a ruling that the firing of the probationary employees, they focused on 6 of them, but it'll apply probably to all the probationary employees, was an unlawful termination because he didn't go through the appropriate steps to terminate the probationary employees, all those federal workers who were fired. So now the question is, will those federal employees be reinstated if this ruling goes into effect and kind of gets authorized? Will now back pay be owed and other damages be owed to these federal employees who were unjustly terminated? We'll keep you posted every step of the way. And while all this is going on, Elon Musk is posting that it's time to fire fake judges. A lot of judges are ruling against Musk and Trump, so now he's calling to fire the judges. And Elon Musk, who
Elon Musk is giving some federal workers the boot and others a second chance to respond to his email. Yeah, I did that with that. As he continues asking for details of what they accomplished over the last week. Madeline Rouge on Slap in Washington with the latest. Good morning, Matt.
Hey, Maddie. Hi, guys. Good morning. Yeah, there's a lot of confusion regarding this directive. Elon Musk says while there is a second chance to respond, failure to answer again will result in termination this time. But the Office of Personnel Management says agencies will be the ones who will be responsive and evaluate non-responses. They look into whether employees were on excused leave yesterday or whether they had access to their email over the weekend. The OPM also says agency heads can exclude some workers from this expectation at their discretion, given that they provide reasons for exclusions. And finally, the OPM says it is up to the agency's leadership to determine what actions are taken. Some agencies, like the FBI and the Department of Defense, for instance, have told employees not to respond to the OPM email saying they'll be doing their own reviews, but others, like the Transportation Secretary, saying that their department is going to be following this directive from Musk. But President Trump says the different orders don't necessarily mean a division between the Trump administration and Musk, and he's defending Musk's order. Listen here.
So what they're doing is they're trying to find out who's working for the government. Are we paying other people that aren't working? And, where's all that? Where's the money going? There was a lot of genius in sending it. We're trying to find out if people are working. And so we're sending a letter to people. Please tell us what you did last week. If people don't respond, it's very possible that there is no such person or they're not working.
There appears to be no deadline set for a second response. We'll see. We get more clarity later today. Lauren, Steve Ainsley.
See, that last word, clarity.
Yeah.
There hasn't been a lot of that. Madeline, so for the federal employees who are watching right now, what are they supposed to do?
Oh, we'll see later on today if we get more answers from the White House, from the president. Look, if you listen to the OPM email, what they'll say is that they're not taking a one-size-fits-all approach to this. The administration says they'll take into account the differences among the different agencies, they'll work with the different agencies, and they're taking into things like confidentiality reasons, for example, which President Trump says was the reason, for example, that the FBI and the DOD, why they might not be responding to this email right now. So they'll take those factors into account. The White House is downplaying the notion that there is a division between the OPM and Musk here. They say at the end of the day, the administration is working together to create more efficiency among federal workers. But again, like you said, Steve, there's no doubt that there are a lot of federal workers who are confused by this, and they are hoping to get more answers later on today.
All right, Madeline. Thank you very much.
Well, Elon posted, he said the email request was utterly trivial, as the standard for passing the test was to type some words and press send. Yet so many failed even that inane test, urged on in some cases by their managers. Have you ever witnessed such incompetence and contempt for how your taxes are being spent? Makes old Twitter look good. Didn't think that was possible. The problem is the federal workers are getting these mixed messages, and it seems to be a turf war by some of the agency leaders, the new agency leaders, and Elon Musk. Now, Donald Trump said yesterday, look, all we're trying to do is make sure these people are actually working, that there are actual people, like Social Security sending out checks to people that are 140 years old. Well, that doesn't exist. So they're just making sure that these positions are filled by live bodies. And so we're not sending money to people, paychecks to people who don't exist. But the problem is you have Office of Personnel Management. They're saying it's voluntary. You won't be fired if you don't respond. You have Kash Patel with the FBI saying pause responses. We're in charge of employee reviews. And then you have Kristi Noem with Department of Homeland Security saying don't respond. So what are you supposed to do?
Right, exactly. So who's running the show?
Well, the president gave them some cover yesterday as well. Remember, a lot of these same agencies, whether you talk about the Defense Department as well as Transportation as well, have invited Doge into their department. So they're not anti-Doge. What they're saying is the information that's going out, there's some security measures that need to put in place for that. So they want to coordinate the response of these.
So so there's a lot of people who are going to be let go in a lot of different agencies. I know the Transportation's let some people go now. The VA, Doug Collins, is dismissed with more than 1,400 employees with non-mission critical positions. Others in Transportation were let go who did not have safety implications day to day, and that's what's happening too. Just about everywhere. If you're a probationary, they're looking to let you go. And I think the overarching headline is we have to cut the federal workload. It's 2.7 million. It's got to get less. The question is now, that was a speech the president gave at CPAC. The president, Elon Musk, saw it and said, I hear you, Mr. President. I put up this email. And the president said yesterday, I'd like the idea of an email. But I just think next time, very easy. A lot of these people are Elon Musk's personal friends. Hey, I'm going to send out an email. And it's going to go to all the divisions. Are you okay with this? Right. Because Kash Patel was only on the job 2 days. He can't have FBI agents who may be miscommunicated being accessed. Same with Tulsi Gabbard. She's like, I really can't do this. Right. So I'm going to
The United States claims to have over 8,000 tons of gold. But what if I told you no one's actually seen that gold in decades? Now, supposedly these bars are stored in heavily guarded vaults, the most famous of which is the Fort Knox Bullion Depository in Kentucky, which alone holds about 4,580 tons, almost half of the country's gold. The rest is split between the U.S. Mint and the Federal Reserve Bank of New York's vault. In total, though, the U.S. reserves have stayed at about 8,100 tons for decades, with only small changes. And the value of all this gold, or something called the book value, is set at a very specific price, $42.22 per ounce, totaling about $11 billion. There's a problem. That price is way below today's market value. At recent market prices, this gold would be worth hundreds of billions of dollars. The U.S. gold reserve is a hugely valuable asset, even if its official accounting value hasn't been updated since the 1970s. But why? Surely the gold reserves are reviewed every year, right? Supposedly it should be. It isn't. And just recently, U.S. banks have been flying in thousands and thousands of gold bars from London to New York, sparking a lot of theories as to what is actually happening. So the question is, if we looked in there today, what would we find? Why doesn't the government just do an audit and tell us? And if it's missing, how would that affect ordinary people? It's one of the most interesting stories you're going to hear about, and that's what I want to share with you. So with that said, let's get into it. Hi, my name is Andre Jick. Hope you're doing well. Come for the finance and stay for the gold. Now, gold is part of America's mythical lore, and throughout history, there have been rumors that the United States doesn't actually have the gold it says it does. But first I gotta ask, how did the U.S. even end up with over 8,000 tons of gold? In 1933, during the Great Depression, President Franklin Roosevelt ended the gold standard for U.S. citizens and ordered the confiscation of most privately held gold through Executive Order 6102. Americans were required to turn in all their gold coins and all their bullion to the government in exchange for paper dollars. This was super controversial at the time, and it resulted in a huge inflow of gold to the U.S. Treasury. Now, to store it, Fort Knox Depository was built in 1936, and by 1937, there were trainloads of seized and stolen gold that were moved into these new vaults. Now, as global tensions rose before World War II, the U.S. got even more gold from other countries to help them protect it, and by 1941, U.S. gold reserves peaked. By the end of 1941, Fort Knox alone held over 20,000 metric tons. Now, at that time, the U.S. controlled about 2/3 of the world's official gold, a concentration of wealth unlike any time in human history. And all of this happened because decades of trade surpluses and the influx of gold from Europe, which it gave to the U.S. for safekeeping during World War II. And gold was seen as this huge part of the monetary system. And under the 1944 Bretton Woods Agreement, the U.S. dollar was directly attached to gold at $35 per ounce, and other countries linked their money to the dollar. America's huge pile of gold gave other countries confidence in the dollar's value. Then in the 1950s, the 1960s, in the post-war decades, everything started to reverse. The U.S. gold reserves started to go down. America started to run what are called trade deficits, and it spent a lot of money on overseas commitments. The U.S. was sending money to countries left and right, and before long, countries started asking for their gold back in exchange for the dollars they had held, which was allowed at the time under the Bretton Woods Agreement. And systematically, gold flowed out of U.S. vaults to pay other countries. And U.S. holdings fell from the World War II peak, and by 1971, U.S. gold reserves were down to about the same level they are today. So what did the U.S. do? It was kind of a rug pull. President Richard Nixon closed the gold on August 15, 1971, ending the convertibility of the dollar into gold. This action broke the Bretton Woods Agreement, and it put the world on a pure fiat or paper currency standard. At that point, the United States decided to keep what was left of the gold rather than continue allowing people to redeem it. So the next question is, if the US dollar is not backed by gold anymore, why does the Federal Reserve supposedly have so much gold still? And the truth is, it doesn't. In reality, the Federal Reserve does not directly own any of the country's gold since 1934, because all the federal gold was turned over to the Treasury. But the Fed does have a claim on it in the form of a gold certificate issued by the Treasury. This gold certificate is recorded on the Fed's balance sheet, sort of like its portfolio of assets, which totals gold at about $11 billion. That represents the nation's entire official gold stock. So the Federal Reserve holds the certificate, and the physical gold stays in the Treasury's vaults. Now, even though the US dollar is no longer backed by gold reserves, there's still an important part of what gives the dollar its perceived value. Because ever since 1973, the gold has been fixed at this $42 per ounce rate, which totals $11 billion, on paper. But in reality, the market's value is way higher. However, the Treasury does not do what's called mark-to-market the asset, and that's why any increase in gold's market price today is not reflected in their official accounts. So the question is, why hold all of that gold? And why the U.S. has so much gold is because it's seen as a hedge against currency risk. Senator Rand Paul once said, gold still gives value to the dollar, and that's why we don't get rid of it.
Also, it brings attention to the fact that gold still has value, and implicitly, not explicitly, but implicitly, gold still gives value to the dollar. That's why we don't get rid of it.
So it's a symbol of stability carried over from the old era of monetary history. But here's what's interesting. If gold was marked to market, and the price was raised from the $42 an ounce to the current market value, in theory, the Treasury could issue more gold certificates to the Fed in exchange for more dollars. And that's why people have pointed out that we should look at revaluing the U.S. gold reserves to market prices so we can add hundreds of billions of dollars to the Treasury's assets. Because if the Treasury has more assets, it can use them to reduce the national debt and stabilize the economy. So then the question is, why don't we do that? And here's where we get into some really interesting theories. Even though the U.S. government tells us that the gold is still there and it's still very safe, a lot of people don't believe the government. First of all, there's a lot of secrecy around all of this. You can't just visit Fort Knox and the other vaults to look at the gold. And that has fueled a lot of speculation that not everything is what it seems. Now, in the 1960s and 1970s, for example, several people claimed that most of Fort Knox's gold was secretly removed, with rumors even suggesting that President Lyndon B. Johnson shipped tons of U.S. gold to London during the late 1960s. Now, according to this theory, the U.S. gold stash might have been used or lent out without the public's knowledge. And Fort Knox became a giant empty shell guarded for show. Now, these claims actually captured the public's imagination, especially as the U.S. gold supply was really shrinking in the 1960s. Now, other people say that, no, actually, the U.S. has all the gold, but the gold in Fort Knox doesn't actually belong to the United States. Historically, Fort Knox safeguards the gold of other countries during World War II and the Cold War. Gold from European countries, for example, was stored in the U.S. to protect it from Nazi and Soviet threats. So maybe the U.S. does have the gold. It's just not ours. But according to official accounts of the government, almost all foreign-owned gold has long been moved out to the only countries. Fort Knox today is supposed to be what's left of U.S.-owned deep storage gold. Other people believe U.S. gold has been swapped or loaned out secretly. But U.S. officials have denied these claims, saying that none of the Treasury's gold is encumbered with any loans or swaps. And some people believe that some of the gold bars in official reserves are maybe even counterfeit gold-plated bars of tungsten or other metals. Tungsten almost has an identical density of gold, making it possible to create a bar that passes a weight test but isn't pure gold. This theory actually gained traction from an unverified 2009 report claiming China received a batch of gold bars that turned out to be fakes. Now, that report was never confirmed. It sparked speculation that if counterfeit bars do exist in the market, maybe even Fort Knox has them. This was such a big theory that Congressman Ron Paul publicly questioned whether Fort Knox gold bars are authentic or if some of them might be these gold-plated tungsten bricks. And during the 2008 financial crisis, people believed the U.S. might have quietly sold or leased out some of the gold to suppress prices or raise cash. But okay, hold on. If some people believe this stuff, and it supposedly is not true, why doesn't the government just do an audit and tell us what's really going on? And the answer is complicated. Officials claim the gold is audited, but there has never been a comprehensive, up-to-date audit that has ever been publicly released. But here's what we do know. When President Dwight Eisenhower took office in 1953, rumors were circulating that some Fort Knox gold was being used to pay wartime bills. In response, a group of auditors conducted a limited inspection of the gold. This is cited as the last full audit of the U.S. gold, which happened over 70 years ago. Although it also wasn't super detailed by modern standards either. Reports say that it was essentially a spot check of about 5 to 7% of the gold bars, and the auditors didn't actually count or test every bar, but they sampled enough to say that at that time, the gold appeared to be in order. People in the 1950s were like, okay, cool. Then, in the 1970s, the U.S. economy started to struggle. High inflation, the oil shock, and the country had come off the gold standard. The question about gold started to be asked again. Where did it go? In 1974, a Washington attorney published a book claiming $20 billion worth of gold was missing from Fort Knox, and that story became really popular. So to silence the doubters, the Treasury decided to put on a show to prove everybody wrong. On September 23, 1974, the Fort Knox vault was opened to 100 congressmen and news media. It was the first look inside for outsiders in a long, long time. Now, the visitors were shown stacks of gold bars, and they were even allowed to hold some of these bars for photos. One radio reporter said, "All I can say is that I saw gold there." Now, this event is sometimes mistakenly referred to as an audit, but in reality, no thorough audit was done during that visit because the tour lasted only a couple of hours, only one vault room was opened for viewing, no bars were tested or weighed, and serial numbers were not checked against the records. It was basically a PR move by the government. Then, in 1974, the U.S. Treasury and the General Accounting Office made a more systematic audit program, and from 1975 to 1981, there was a series of yearly audits on portions of the gold with oversight by the General Accounting Office and the U.S. Mint. Now, those audits involved opening the vaults, counting bars, and testing random samples for purity. By 1981, they reported that there were no discrepancies that were found between the reported and the actual numbers of gold in storage. This, too, was not a 100% audit. The last report noted that about 212.7 million troy ounces had been verified, which represents roughly 80% of the total U.S.-owned gold. And in terms of gold bars, they had checked only 21% of the gold bars by serial number. After 1981, though, the audit stopped, and since the 1980s, according to the U.S. Mint and U.S. Treasury, the gold is inventoried and audited regularly on the basis of trust me, bro. Now, the details of those audits, of course, are not told to the public. That is until 2017. That's when Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin made a publicized trip to Fort Knox, along with Senator Mitch McConnell and a few other officials. And this was the first time that a sitting Treasury had visited Fort Knox since 1948. After the visit, Mnuchin said, "Glad the gold is there." Unfortunately, one visit by government insiders is still not an actual audit. And that brings us to today. One of the biggest reasons why people are talking about gold again is because of the trade war and reports that banks are flying over 8,000 gold bars, about 2% of the total, out of London and into the U.S. And some people think that this absolutely confirms that the U.S. is out of gold. But the real reason is actually something else. It's a banking strategy called arbitrage. Here's how it works. Right now, JP Morgan and HSBC are literally flying gold bars across the ocean from London to New York. And they're doing that because they're trying to fix their short position and make some extra cash while they're doing it. That's because right now, gold is more expensive in New York than it is in London by about $20 per ounce. I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're dealing with billions of dollars of gold, it adds up really fast. JP Morgan and HSBC are what's called gold market makers, meaning they help move gold around the world and they provide liquidity to buyers and sellers. And part of their business plan is gold leasing, where they lend out physical gold to other banks, investors, and users. In return, they earn an interest on these loans, but here's the catch. When they lease the gold out, they hedge their risk by selling gold futures in New York. In some terms, they're betting on the gold price to stay stable so they don't take on unnecessary risk. But something went wrong. There was geopolitical tension and uncertainty, especially around Trump's new tariffs. So gold prices in New York went up more than they did in London. That means the bank's short positions, or their gold futures bets, are now losing money. So to stop bleeding cash, they're physically moving gold from London to New York so they can settle their futures contracts and close their short positions without taking on huge losses. This is called arbitrage. By shipping physical gold to New York, they can sell it at a higher price. Then they can use that money to cover their short positions and maybe pocket some of the difference. JP Morgan alone is reportedly moving over $4 billion worth of gold across the Atlantic this month. That's what they're really doing. It's not necessarily some giant cover-up for them. But even that explanation by itself is just not good enough. Even Elon thinks we should audit Fort Knox. He's openly suggested live streaming the vaults because, let's be honest, who wouldn't want to see what's inside of there? So why won't the government just do it? Is it really about security, or are they trying to hide something? What's most interesting to me is that there's always been this duality of what we're told. Economists like Barry Eichengreen and central bankers say that the Fed and Treasury have no incentive to lie to us about the gold. Doing so would be a huge scandal with very little benefit. Personally, I kind of disagree with that. I think there's a lot of incentive to not be truthful. On one hand, you have officials telling us that everything is going well, the audits have checked out, and on the other hand, you have Elon tweeting, and it's gone. So people don't really know what to believe. So it makes sense why so many people are skeptical. We're supposed to believe that.
Welcome back. House Republicans are expected to vote on one budget bill today. One big, beautiful budget bill. House Speaker Mike Johnson believes it will pass despite not having everyone on board. Representatives Tim Burchett, Victoria Sparks, and Tom Massey all set to vote no, saying the plan does not reduce spending enough. Moderates are also raising concerns over cuts to programs like Medicaid. While House Democrats have their own problem with it, they plan to protest the tax cuts in the bill. Republicans can only lose one vote in the House to pass anything on party lines. Joining me now is Texas Congressman Keith Self. Congressman, good to see you. Thanks so much for being here. You've got a whopper on your hands. How are you going to vote?
I'm going to vote yes, because this bill funds President Trump's primary objectives, his priorities. We have got to give him the resources that the American people voted him in for, mainly the border. First and foremost, the border. So that the Holman can do the repatriations that President
I seen this Happy Meal toy over there. How much free is that?
Take it.
Free?
Yep.
Well, what was the price on it?
Free. You can have the rest of it.
I was going to offer you this mystery box.
Okay.
To trade.
Okay.
But you just gave them to me for free.
Okay.
I'm just going to give you what's inside the box.
All right.
It's $500.
No.
Yeah. It's $500 for you, sir. I seen this Happy Meal toy over there. How much
Free.
is that?
Take it.
Free?
Yep.
Well, what was the price on it?
Free. You can have the rest of it if you want.
I was going to offer you this mystery box.
Okay.
To trade.
Okay.
Okay.
But you just gave them to me for free.
Okay.
I'm just going to give you what's inside the box.
All right.
It's $500.
No.
Yeah.
Legal tender is kind of an esoteric, sneaky concept in that it's what you would do when you seek to imbue something that does not have monetary properties with monetary properties. You would never need a legal tender law if you were transacting in gold and silver because people know gold and silver are money. Exactly right. It's only when you start introducing fraud and counterfeit to the system that you have to create a legal function that forces people to accept and transact in that, in which they otherwise would not.
Tuesday, February 25th, 2025, Echo 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with the executive director of the Sound Money Defense League. We spoke with JP Cortez in October, and a lot has happened since then in terms of gold, money, and everything else. So welcome back, JP. How are you?
I'm doing great, Mario. Thank you for having me back on. It's great to be here with you.
You're welcome. First of all, could you give the viewers a quick introduction about you and the organization that you represent?
Absolutely. So,
now let's get over to what is actually propping up the United States economy. And I want to start, I just had a conversation with Greg Manarino, fantastic conversation. And one of the highlights, and you guys will post that tomorrow on the interview channel. So if you guys aren't subscribed to that, definitely go check out Rebel Capital's interviews. That's the new channel that we set up where I'm doing interviews 2-3 times per week. But one of the main highlights, I think, was Greg talking about how the American people, the average Joe, how they are dependent on the current structure of the economy, how they are dependent on the current structure of the fundamentally unsound American economy. They put a little bit, may add some description in there. And that if you look at the United States economy, you ask yourself, what is propping it up? Because if you zoom out, you may think, oh, well, George, that's because we have an awesome economy, we have entrepreneurs, we have all these things. Okay, but let's just go back to 2018. And if I told you the central planners were going to lock everyone in a cage for 2 years, they wouldn't let you out to work unless you were, quote unquote, essential. Who determines that? And we were going to shut down the entire economy. We're going to shut down the entire global economy. We're not going to let you take your dog out for a walk. We're not going to allow you to open up your business. We're going to force you to close your business indefinitely. We're not going to allow you to take your kids to school. We're basically going to put you in a jail cell. And in addition to that, we're just going to give everyone, quote unquote, free money. And if I told you back in 2019 that this was going to happen, what would be your prediction for the economy? Would you say, oh my gosh, we will definitely not have a recession? Oh my gosh, we'll probably have an economic boom. Oh my gosh, yeah, that sounds like a fantastic economic policy. Now, every single one of you watching this video would have said that is going to lead to mad acts. Now, I don't know if it's going to be an inflationary depression, recession, or deflationary, but the stuff is going to properly hit the fan like we have never seen before. You can't just shut down the economy. So, as you guys know, that's exactly what we did. And somehow we haven't had that recession. We haven't had that Mad Max type scenario. Why? Is it because maybe we were all wrong? Maybe the Keynesians were all right? Is it because the only economic pain that we had to go through was just the CPI going up to 9%, and that was just broadly distributed for all 330 million Americans? Or was it because our economy became even more distorted than it was before, at the expense of the poor and middle class, and average Joe and Joe? And that kicking the can down the road will eventually lead to an even bigger crash, let's say, than we otherwise would have had. And maybe, just maybe, that crash didn't happen all at once. Maybe that crash is like Japan, where it's just death by 1,000 cuts. To the point where most of the normies don't even notice it. They just wake up 20 years later and they're like, damn, how did I get so poor? I used to be able to make ends meet. My wife used to be able to stay home and watch the kids, or one parent, whatever your situation is. We used to only need one income. Now we need 3, 4. Now we need the kids to work. Now we need the dog to work. Or maybe we need some sort of miracle. We need to just bet the ranch on part point and just keep our fingers crossed, because that's the only speculation gambling. That's the only way that we are going to even maintain our purchasing power. That's an example of death by 1,000 cuts. I don't know how it plays out. Who knows, right? But what I do know is you can't shut down the economy and not pay the price. It's got to come out somewhere. And the Keynesian stimulus and all this stuff, sure, it papers over the problem, but it doesn't eliminate the problem. It exacerbates the problem. So let's look, and if you want proof, here you go. All I want you guys to do is a very quick, simple thought experiment. You just look at where the S&P 500 is today. At, let's just say 6,000. There's a log chart here. So let's just assume for a moment, nothing drastic. Let's just assume that the stock market, S&P 500, goes back down to the level it was, I don't know, just say in 2000, I mean, it wouldn't be that bad, right? 2,700. That would mean the stock market is better. And by the way, if we're just looking at fundamentals, that would take us down to just the average PE ratio. If we're looking at K ratio, Schiller was that cyclically adjusted PE ratio. So right now we're right around 38. I just did a video on this, and that historic average is right around 17. So if we go down, let's just assume. I mean, obviously I'm oversimplifying here, but that would take us down. Let's just say 50%. And at that level, the stock market, based on historic standard, would just be priced fairly. Fairly. It wouldn't be super cheap. It'd just be fairly priced. Use the Buffett indicator, same exact thing. So you can sit here and say, "Oh my gosh, George, you're bearish," blah 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 blah. I'm not. I'm just pointing out. It's just reality. It's just numbers. The market went down to its historic fair value. That's where it would be. That's not debatable. So then just ask yourself, if that were, I'm not saying it's going to happen, if that were to happen, what would purchasing power for society at large, what would aggregate demand do? It would not just contract, it would contract massively. And if you don't believe me, just look at what happened during the GFC. Most of you lived through that. Stock market went down by 50%, housing market went down by 50%. What happened to the aggregate purchasing power? What happened to the economy? What happened to aggregate demand? I mean, the younger people might not remember back that far, but most of the adults watching this video probably remember it like it was yesterday. What happened to the restaurants? They were vacant. 2009, 2010. And I remember when I retired in 2012, I put up an ad for just some handyman, to help do some remodels with some of my properties. And I remember I put that up on Craigslist in Kansas City, Missouri, and within an hour, I probably had 100 resumes. Right? That's how bad it was back then. Let's look at a chart of housing prices, and we can see that, again, I'm not saying that housing prices are going to crash. I'm not saying that. You just look at the price-to-income ratio as an example. You just look at the inflation-adjusted price as an example. And you can see that we are not just at all-time highs. We are at nosebleed levels. We are way higher than we were during 2006. So again, this is not to say that home prices are coming down. It might go up, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't mean, that's the thing about what Chris calls it yesterday, I won't go into that depth, but it doesn't mean that they're not at obscene levels right now. And it doesn't mean that they're wildly expensive, and it doesn't mean that there isn't, therefore, a tremendous amount of downside risk. Again, we can go up 20% in 2025. That could happen forever. But it doesn't mean that home prices are
Boy, I'll tell you what, there are so many things that are happening. What am I going to talk about today? Well, today we have to talk about the debt ceiling danger that's coming up and the big battle that's looming there. But make sure that you give us a like. Go ahead and subscribe if you're not already. And of course, share, share, share. Because quite honestly, it doesn't matter whether it's a Republican or a Democrat. When the debt ceiling comes due, the debt ceiling comes due. And what you're looking at here is the longest U.S. government shutdown in history, going all the way back to looks like 76 is the earliest one. And let's see, there wasn't a government shutdown before the 70s when we were on at least a quasi gold standard. That's interesting. But President Trump holds the record for the longest government shutdown in history, 35 days in 2018 into 2019. And in March, this battle royale picks up again. And so it is quite clear that anything will be used. And what does that exactly do? Because frankly, shutdowns are always just a waste of money and time. What they're saying is we spent all this money, but we're not going to pay for it. So you know that debt ceiling has to be raised, especially with all the debt that has to be issued to fund all of the programs that they want to do. So they can use it as a negotiation tool and they can use it as a threat, and I think that's what we're really seeing here. But it could pack a huge punch. And remember, what we don't know is what is that one little thing going to be that's going to topple everything and create that next crisis. Senate Republicans plot to leapfrog Speaker Johnson on spending fight as Democrats threaten to shut down the government. We have had, and like I said, doesn't matter whether you're Republican or you're Democrat, this is a big battle that always comes about. It kind of makes sense for you to become your own central banker, doesn't it? If we have to take steps to be able to hold them accountable, use the leverage that we have to force it, I cannot support efforts that will continue this lawlessness. That's an opinion. I'm not going there. The point is if we have to take steps to be
I don't know how to say this and be politically correct, but what the heck is wrong with Ukraine? What is so special about Ukraine that it's worth bankrupting Canada over?
I don't have the answer. I don't understand. Or do they have gold that we're trying to ban? Do they have like minerals that Canada desperately needs? Is there like a love affair between Zelensky and Trudeau? Like, I don't freaking get it, man. It drives me nuts. Look, Ukrainian people, I have total empathy. Anyone who's in a war-torn country, you have my empathy. I think it's sad. I think that there's a humanitarian response. I think that there's a peacekeeping response. But, dude, bankrupting this country that's affecting your quality of life, my quality of life, my children's quality of life, your children's quality of life, this shit is bananas, man. That's what we're taking a look at this entire video. This entire video, sorry, I'm a little too excited. This entire video is about Ukraine and Canada's, Justin Trudeau's pledge. By the way, this should be criminal. I don't know how to emphasize this. What kind of rules are there? Can I pull out, like, can I raise my hand and say, hey, hello, can we put this son of a gun in jail? Because he's like 30 days away from no longer being prime minister, and he is just giving our money away, man. Like, it gives me freaking goosebumps. Zoom in if you want. I got goosebumps because this shit doesn't sit well with me. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to the video, everybody. Before we get into it, I do want to encourage you all to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. And there is a little bell notification. If you can just do me a favor and click and tap that, that would be absolutely phenomenal, because this country's going broke, and YouTube is the last hope we have of doing absolutely anything. I don't understand this, okay? Canada has already given away billions of dollars. Who knows how much money? There's probably a statistic online. 10 billion, 50 billion, 150. Who the frick knows? But it's too much money, and it's not justified. Justin Trudeau today has pledged $5 billion. Meanwhile, the EU, with 27 countries together, the EU, 27-ish countries together, okay? 3.5 billion. So Canada, uno country, 5 billion. 27 countries together, 3.5 billion. I failed math, probably in high school, but that really, if I carry the 1 times divide, that doesn't make any sense. So let's take a look at what the heck is going on. Okay, here we go. Here's a photo of Justin Trudeau and Zelensky posing because, well, this guy right here is getting this country $5 billion more. What's it broken down into? So, Justin Trudeau posted on X earlier this morning. In Kiev this afternoon, I laid out Canada's pledge to help Ukraine secure lasting peace and defend its sovereignty. How is this legal? You're 30 days away, ish, give or take, whatever, from being no longer the prime minister. How do you have authority to do this? This is nuts. 25 more LAV 3 infantry fighting vehicles. How many does Canada have? What's going on? Even if we're not giving it away, even if they're loans, how many do we have? I feel like we've given them more than what we actually have here in our stock, right? 2 Canadian-made armored combat support vehicles, which Ukrainian forces will be trained on in Germany. 4 F-16 flight simulators. Now, put a pin in that one, because that's a freaking weird one, okay? The first installment of Canada's loan to Ukraine that will draw from frozen Russian assets. Okay? New energy security support in the wake of consistent, reckless attacks by Russia on Ukrainian energy infrastructure. Millions of additional rounds of ammunition, protective equipment, and first aid kits. I feel like we might need them bullets, though. Russia's actions are a direct attack against the rules-based international order. The response from democracies must be clear. Peace through strength. Meanwhile, this doesn't make any sense because Trump is trying to figure out a peace treaty right now. So why are we committing not 5 million, not 50 million, not 500 million, freaking 5 billion? 1,000 millions times 5. Ay, ay, ay. So remember I said, hold on to the F-16 flight simulators? Alright, so this gentleman right here, Marty up north on X, said Trudeau's 4 F-16 flight simulators on Amazon are $10,000 in total. But $2,000 a piece, right? $2,500-ish. Okay? He's charging taxpayers $250 million. Now, is there a difference between this Amazon F-16 flight simulator and a military-grade F-16 flight simulator? Probably. But is it a difference of $10,000 to $250 million? No, that's insane, man. That's like saying I have a fleet of Honda Civics, and I'm going to sell them to you for $10 million each. They're very valuable. They're not, but they are. That's how government contracting works. It stinks. It's disgusting. So on top of all of the money and ammo and all of these nice shiny toys, we're also sending troops. But here's the kicker. Canadian Armed Forces is now accepting. I should probably edit out this laughter, but I can't help myself. The Canadian military is now accepting recruits suffering from any and all conditions, including those with anxiety and asthma. With all medical conditions, there's a spectrum. Oh my gosh, we're sending people into the military who have pre-existing health conditions that literally contradicts the entire baseline for the health standard in the military before this new announcement. I don't understand what is going on with Canada's spending and our military, but it doesn't make any sense at all. So now let's get into what the politicians actually said instead of just in blatant text form. Starting off with Justin Trudeau's alleged mistress, Melanie Joly. What did she have to say this morning as she role plays?
Putin cannot just leave, rearm, and reinvade. This would be bad for Ukraine. This would be bad for all of us. And so we need to make sure that there is future security for Ukrainians. It will have to be part of any peace deal. And so meanwhile, for us, it's military aid, it's financial aid, it is different parts of
Back here at home, there's growing confusion this morning now that Elon Musk's imposed deadline has passed for federal workers to respond to an email justifying their positions or to resign. The Musk-directed email was sent by the U.S. Office of Personnel Management to government employees over the weekend, shortly after Musk wrote in a post on X that if they did not respond by 11:59 p.m. last night, it would be, quote, taken as a resignation. NBC News now has learned the Department of Government Efficiency is expected to feed the responses from federal workers who replied to that Musk-directed email into an artificial intelligence system to determine whether those jobs are necessary. AI will decide their fate. That's according to 3 sources with knowledge of the system. But confusion continued yesterday ahead of the deadline. First, individual departments advised their employees not to respond, while others said they must respond. Then the OPM said responses were optional. Then Musk said responses were required, and failure to respond would result in termination. President Trump appeared to agree, but added to the confusion by saying those who did not respond would be, quote, sort of semi-fired.
I thought it was great because we have people that don't show up to work and nobody even knows if they work for the government. So by asking the question, tell us what you did this week, what he's doing is saying, are you actually working? And then if you don't answer, like you're sort of semi-fired or you're fired, because a lot of people are not answering because they don't even exist.
Last night, Musk followed the president by posting that federal workers who did not respond to the initial email would be given another chance, but failure to respond a second time would result in termination. The White House did not immediately respond to an NBC News request or comment on that post. Let's bring in senior political columnist for Politico, Jonathan Martin. So, Jonathan, we're seeing some of the first, I guess, pushback from these individual departments to Elon Musk just having free reign with that chainsaw he wielded at CPAC telling people if you don't respond to this, we'll assume you're resigning and you're gone. And if you do respond, we're going to feed it into AI, and AI will decide whether you keep your job or not. What do you make of what we've seen just even in the last 24 hours?
Yeah, I'm curious for the AI function on semi-fired. That's a pretty advanced AI software these days, apparently, that can do the semi-fired. But they're making it up as they go. And it's not more complicated than that. I think Trump obviously wants Elon to bring the efficiencies of a private company to the federal government. And Elon is doing to the federal government, or trying to, what he has done in the private sector. It just doesn't work that way. And the upshot of it, tragically, for the federal force and for the country, is that you guys know what's going to happen. The people who have the best opportunities and the best options, or the most talented, are going to say, to borrow from the old country song, take this job and shove it. They're going to walk. They're going to go in the private sector, take that pension early, move down to the low country or 30A, Joe, and enjoy the rest of their life in their early 60s. And everybody else who's going to try to hang on is going to go to court and try to keep their job. But it's just asking for the best people to walk. And so is something.
That's the concern that we've heard, frankly, on this show, on other shows. People saying you're going to lose really talented minds that want to do their work for America and on behalf of the public. I can tell you I've heard that from federal workers that I've spoken to. They're in agony, not knowing what's coming next, but then also wanting to serve and having no place to put that service because of this. But then Musk is also applying this same attitude of flaunting the norms of how these firings would even typically be done